is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs message. Thanks, guys.
Before I get into that, I really want to reiterate for you Flourish ladies who aren't booked in, the reason we show that today is because we're going to be sending out the brochures and flyers and all that at the same time as the Elemental and the youth conference stuff to all the churches literally in like a week and a half's time. So, and then all the places will go. That's why we show you today. So please, if you want to go to that, get booked in. So, part 3 of the 7-week series of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Don't worry if you haven't been around for the last few weeks, because each of these messages are independent from each other. So it doesn't matter if you've missed it. You can catch up on YouTube if you want, though. But we've been looking at the 7 dwarfs, all 7 of them, and we're into number 3, looking at their traits and how that's reflected in us in many regards. And so week 1, we done Grumpy, everyone's favourite dwarf. Are you going to eat on the front row? Oh, I haven't had breakfast. What have you got this week? Every week, have you noticed, you've got a different pastry? Pain au chocolat? Always pain au chocolat. Of course it is. One of it, what, a normal croissant and a pain au chocolat. How's the 5 Goes weight loss stuff going? Oh, I hate him. He eats all this stuff and still loses weight. It's really, life isn't fair. That's all I'm saying. So, we done Grumpy. We done Happy. This week, we're going to do Bashful. Oh, I'm not sure that... That is Bashful. Does look a little bit shy. Bless him. Who considers himself a bashful person? Come on. Look, obviously, no one's going to put their hand up. Who doesn't consider themselves a bashful person? And it's whoever's got their hands down, then we can work out who's the bashful person. Don't worry, I won't point at you or anything. But perhaps a different word. We don't really use the word bashful in today's society. Usually shy or quiet or maybe retiring or timid or just self-conscious maybe. But you know, bashful presents itself in different ways at different times in our life and in different people. And if I'm honest, out of all the 7 dwarfs, I would say this one represents me the least. I'm pretty sure when I look at all of them, this one represents me the least. And yet, I still have times of being bashful, and in my past I have, and in the future, no doubt I will. I remember when I was 4 years old, so a little bit older than my youngest at the minute, when I was 4 years old, and we used to go to a creche. So I might have been even 3 or 4, around the same age as my 4th child. Little tiny, little cute thing. She's a little warrior princess. But when I was 4, you wouldn't believe it, my older brother, who was a year and a half older than me, wherever we'd go to this creche, I'd be like, whoa, like big old, like that's how I was as a little 4-year-old. Let's fight. And then one day, my brother wasn't there. And my mum tells me that I went in cowering like this, because I didn't have Big Brother anymore, and I hid behind the curtain for the whole time, for like 3 hours of creche, like, see, because my Big Brother wasn't there. You can't imagine that of me, can you? My brother's not there. But there's been times when I've been bashful in my past. I remember I was quite bashful in some regards, probably between the ages of 8 and 12, because I'm a big boy now. I'm trying to lose weight, but I was a big chunk, and I mean I was a chunk. You know Chunk out of Goonies? I was like Chunk out of Goonies from the ages 8 to 12. I was massive. I was a big dude. In fact, my mum's got pictures of me. I might have even shown them in the past, but I can't bring myself to show them again, of me and my brother. We were both big, chunky boys, and we got a picture of us doing sumo in the garden on a slippery plastic sheet with fairy liquid on the thing to make it all slippery. And we look like sumo wrestlers. We are that big. And so I remember at that point in my life, I was a little bit bashful in my body. And this is back in the days, young people in the room, where in school for PE, the boys had to do it in their pants. Like, that seems like 50 years ago, and it's not quite 50 years ago. But you used to do it in your pants with no top on. I remember at that age, I was a big chunk, and I used to remember we used to sit leg crossed on the cold, like, marble floor in this school hall that was freezing. And I'd try and cover up as much of my body as possible with my arms. And the thing that made it worse, the thing that really tipped it over the edge for me, was when we done indoor high jump, and we had to run and jump over a high jump bar. And my head teacher and PE teacher, when I was like 9 years old, was measuring on the Richter scale how much I shook the floor when I landed. Honestly, you're laughing, Neil. That's naughty. It was funny. It is funny, but for me at that time, that was something I was bashful about. And I wasn't in any other regard at that time, but this sort of thing I was bashful about, I was shy about, I didn't want to be on display. You do a great high jump and get 5.7 on the Richter scale as your measurement. It's not a... It doesn't build you up too much. And then probably from the age of 12 to maybe 16, during the high school years, for me, I was bashful around, if I'm being honest, anyone that I thought was a pretty girl. Like, and I don't, because you speak to my wife, my threshold is too high for how good looking I am. I'm telling you, my threshold of what good looking is, she'll tell you, it's just like everyone, like, I don't care, but there's a few that I'd have gone, oh, she's pretty, and then all of a sudden, I'd turn into this dude. And I wouldn't want to look, I wouldn't want to know that I liked them, or it'd be like, oh. Like, from 12 till about probably 16, maybe 17 years old, that's what I was like. I was just like, oh, I can't. Every other woman didn't matter, but if I found a pretty, and so I was bashful at that time. For others, it's a whole host of things. Like for you might not relate to any of them, maybe you relate to all of them. But for others, it's something different. One example is like public speaking. I think it's a big one for a lot of people. Like doing what I'm doing now, standing with a mic in front of people. For most people, that's like terrifying. And all of a sudden, you become a bashful dwarf. You know, there's a few people in the room, and I won't make them speak on a mic, that just hate it. Like Tony, for example, hates speaking on a mic, don't you, Tony? At the back there. He hates it. He hates being in front of people, everyone looking at him. One-to-one small groups, amazing. Like, I wish I could be as good as him, but on a mic, doesn't like it, hates it. And so you might have heard this story. But I have to, and I don't care that I've told this story before, because I love it. It is my favourite story of all time. But Tony dislikes public speaking, but he was asked to say a few words at somebody's funeral. Somebody's wife died, and he was asked to say a few words at the funeral. And you can imagine that as a big ask for him, because he's resistant. It's like, I don't like doing this sort of stuff. But because he's English, he didn't say no. He said, yeah, that's fine, yeah. And then complain about it until the date. But he was resistant. But because he is loving kind of dude, he agreed and prepared a reading and ended up actually driving this person to the funeral. Not the should have written that down correctly. Driving the person to the funeral whose wife had died, and with Kaylee in the back. And I love it. And on the way, Tony asked, who else is doing a reading at the funeral? And the guy said, you are. And Tony's like, yeah, I know I'm doing a reading, but who else is doing a reading? It's like, no one else is doing a reading. You're doing the reading. And he's like, Tony's thinking in his head, it's going to be short then, because there's only one reading with all the other stuff. There's usually like 5 or 6 things that goes on. So, it's, well, who's leading the service then? And this man said, well, you are. And the panic. He told me this story, and honestly, I couldn't stop laughing. In fact, sometimes I'll wake up at night, Tony, and I'll remember this story you told me, and I'll just laugh. It's the funniest thing, because the person who hates it the most is minutes away from delivering a funeral that he has not prepared. Not only is he giving the reading that he didn't want to do, he's hosting the whole funeral. He's the person at the front leading the funeral, pushing the button. He's doing the whole thing. And what's funny is, because he's English, he couldn't say, no, I'm not. He went, oh. And then Kaylee and him do the conversation with eyes, through eyes, with couples do, with the eyebrow. These two are great at it. They can communicate in 3 different languages just with their eyebrows. And they had to do that through a rear-view mirror. And so Kaylee's quickly getting something together on her phone from Google about how to run a funeral. Tony's never done that before. It's hilarious, because even me, and I do this sort of thing, I couldn't do it. Honestly, mate, I would have said 9. But you've done it out of love. Honestly, there's just a level of love for other people pushed through. Oh, it's so funny. God bless you. That is love. But he was scared, no doubt. Scared's not even the right word, probably, is it? But he felt bashful, that bashful dwarf of that area of life where it's like, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. But for the sake of others, he'd done it anyway. Where, and having courage is acting in the face of fear. It's not feeling fear. That's not courage. When you're not scared to do something, that's not courage. Courage is when you're terrified of doing it and you do it anyway. The brave still experience fear. They just do it anyway. And so I want to be clear. When I say bashful, I don't mean introvert. I'm not talking about introvert, because the room's probably split evenly-ish in here of extroverts and introverts. And I'm not talking about just the introvert character. Because often extroverts, let's face it, who's an extrovert in the room? But hands will go right. Yeah, that's me. That's me. I'm the extrovert. Often extroverts try and fix introverts. That's what we do in life. We think they're somehow broken. Like they don't know how to socialise. They don't know how to be human. Like 50% of the population are introverts. Get over it. They're introverts. They're always going to be introverts. But we extroverts try and fix them. Like, you know, they're Bashful the dwarf. And we've got to fix them so they're more confident and are more like us. And yet, it's a fiction, really, because I think introverts often think that extroverts are just egotistical. You quiet introverts sat in your chair, you think these loud people, they think so much of themselves. They're just egotistical people who want to be on show all the time. And that's a fiction too. And so, I don't know about you, but I've met plenty of arrogant, self-assured introverts. And I've met many an extrovert who are so just terribly ashamed of everything about themselves and not confident in any regard. And the extroversion is a cover for that in many regards. So one definition of bashful might be reluctant to draw attention to oneself. And you might, as an introvert, you might not know this about extroverts, that what extroverts do often is make a big song and dance about one thing to actually distract you from the thing that they are actually bashful about. And so I'm not talking about the introvert in the corner who sits quietly, who's happy not to talk to people. This is not what I'm talking about. This is not the bashful I'm talking about, because extroverts can be bashful, introverts can be bashful. It just displays itself in a different way. Because many introverts are fierce and brave, full of faith, stand up for things. Bashful presents itself differently in each of us. Like many people would say, I'm not bashful, but there's things in my past and even now that the bashful dwarf comes out for. And so, even if you're extrovert, this isn't a message for the person next to you. It displays itself in different ways. My boy Joel now, he's 13, he turned 13 last week. I've got a teenager now, makes me well old. Teenager plus grey hair. How many points does that add? Adds 5. Matt has this system that everything you have in life, it adds an age to your actual age. So if you get like a caravan or something, you add 5 years to your age. If you go bald, it was neutral apparently, neutral. If you had a kid, I remember we had a kid first, he added 3 years each for that. And so he has, but my son now 13, not seemingly bashful. He's quite quiet actually, but he's not, you wouldn't call him bashful. At 4 years old, when I was hiding behind the curtain, when my brother wasn't there, he as child number 1 was stood in Tesco's between 2 bodybuilders going, all right, ladies, to these big Polish fellas. And me going, please don't hurt me. But he wasn't bashful in that regard. He was like, could take on the world. I remember telling him, like, you can't, like, there are strangers out there that are dangerous. And I was trying to instill that into him, not in a way that was terrifying, because with my second child, who's terrified of everything, I'm like, everyone's fine. You need to be told, it's probably going to be all right. But with Joel, it's like, things are dangerous. Things might eat you. People might try and steal you. Well, I'll just punch them and kick them in the... That's what he used to say at 4 years old. And so he wasn't bashful. I remember he went to the Jiu-Jitsu's Worlds not too long ago, to the World Championship in Jiu-Jitsu, and he went along to it, and the sessions leading up to it, the coach was talking to the kids about, you know, when you get in that room and there's thousands of people, and people are watching you compete, how then butterflies come up and you'll feel nervous and terrified, and it's a good thing because it switches you on. And he sat on the mat looking at me going, what's he on about? He didn't understand. What is he talking? Because he'd been in the Worlds before as well. So there's a second. He's like, what feeling? He couldn't relate to this bashful nature of this dwarf that comes out of other people in these high-level competitions. Didn't even break his threshold. It's just like training to him. And yet, Even still, he hates interacting with anyone at a supermarket. To go and buy something at a till and talk to someone behind a till. Think how crazy that is. Thousands of people watching him compete, not even a thing. But saying, good morning, here's my money, thank you very much. He hates it. Like Bashful, he hates, he's like, don't make me do it, and I make him do it. He needs to learn these lessons. Like, if you can go and perform in front of the world, but you can't buy some apples for your family, there's a problem there. But the bashful dwarf comes out in different areas, in different people at different times. But we do all have a bashful dwarf living inside of us. And again, I know that's a weird phrase for church. We all have a bashful dwarf living inside of us. It's just when it comes out, when it presents itself, when he rears his head. And so, I've got a question for you. What are you scared of? What are you scared of? Now, for me, I'm scared of weird things like cows. Don't like cows. I can't tell what they're thinking. You can't tell what, at least with the dog, they have some sort of eyebrow movement, and you've got a little bit of body language. And I know you can do this with every animal, but I haven't been around enough cows to have downloaded the data and the behavioural things but I can't tell what a cow's thinking, and therefore I'm a bit fearful of it. And so if I have to walk through a field, I'll walk around the cow. Not even a bull, even a baby calf cow, I'm terrified of. I wouldn't say scared of, but I have a thing about melon seeds as well. Not individually, that'd be weird to be scared of an individual melon seed, but clusters of melon seeds I've got a thing for, I can't do. Anything clustery, like the underside of boats or anything, freaks me out. I don't like that sort of stuff. But I'm not really talking about what we're scared of. More like what you're scared of doing. What are you scared of? What are you bashful of doing? Or another way of putting it is probably like this. What are you not doing that God is calling you to do? What are you not doing that God's calling you to do because you're scared, because you're timid in that environment, because you're bashful in that specific zone that God's calling you out of, because you're terrified of the possible results? And I asked this question a few weeks back in a different message. I might have phrased it slightly differently, but I think repetition is required. God would ask the same question over and over again of the same people over and over again, because he's like, you ain't got it yet, and maybe I haven't got it yet. What am I not doing that God's called me to do because I'm being timid, because I'm bashful, because I'm scared of the results? In Exodus 3 and 4, when God appeared to Moses, you know, in the burning bush, and called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, that moment, that pinnacle moment, Moses displayed you could say a certain hesitancy. He was like, I'm not sure I'm the man. He displayed this bashfulness of like, I can't do that. And it seems like a big task, but the thing actually God asked him to do was just like, go and tell Pharaoh this thing. That was it. He didn't even say, and you're going to have all these things. It was just initially, it was like, just go and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Like, most people could do that, but when you think about who he was saying it to, quite a big deal. But he expressed almost immediately feelings of inadequacy and reluctance to speak particularly. He became this dude who was like, don't you treat my people, bash people, accidentally killed someone, running away. You know, it's quite an amazing dude in all respects. All of a sudden, this bashful dwarf came out of him when God says, I'd like you to do something very specific that I'm asking of you, and it's to talk. Some of us would be like, easy. Tony would be like, I don't want to do that thing. It says in Exodus 4:10, when Moses reveals his insecurity, this is when it boiled down to it. This is what Moses' problem was, not being the leader. It says this, that Moses said to the Lord, we put it up there, Exodus 4:10, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Effectively saying, I've got this speech impediment which you can clearly hear. You're asking me, think about this. God's asking him the thing that he's the most bashful of. He's like, this is the thing I cannot do. I can do it. I could lead an army. But don't ask me to go and have a conversation, and rational conversation with a leader about why it would be good to let this group of people go. Don't ask me to do that. And yet that's the very thing that was asked of him. Isn't it funny how God tests us in the areas that we're bashful in? Isn't it funny that God made him lead a funeral because he's scared of public speaking? It's funny. I'm sure God's laughing, even at Moses. I'm going to ask you to do something you don't want to do. But it's not funny when the bashful dwarf comes out. But it illustrates this about Moses, this hesitation, this bashfulness, when faced with a significant task to him. To others, maybe it would have been easy, but however, we find as the story unfolds that we see how God reassures and equips Moses in every way that he's needed. He's like, well, you can have your brother, Aaron. Come on, Aaron, as you Americans say. Aaron, as we say. You can have him. He'll help you. He'll be your mouthpiece. You're going to do this together. He puts things in place for our weaknesses, for our bashful dwarf. In Judges 6 and 7, when God chose Gideon, I love this story about Gideon, to lead the Israelites against the Midianites. You know, to lead the army. And Gideon's a humble dude, but a hesitant individual, like reluctant, I would say. But he displayed his bashfulness in this particular area for this significant and specific role of leading an army. You know, when you think of someone who's leading an army, you don't think of like a skinny computer dweeb, do you? You think of a big, tall, strong warrior man who'd do that. And yet, in Judges 6:15, it says this. Gideon expresses doubt about his ability when he says this. I love, always polite. Pardon me, my Lord. Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family. I'm like, we're the weakest, and I'm the weakest of the weakest. And you're calling me to lead an army against these people. I think it's funny. I do. I think it's funny. God's saying that bashful dwarf in you that's created because of your physical inability, I'm going to come and challenge. I'm going to make him step out. I'm going to bring him out in you. I'm actually going to ask the thing that you're terrified and bashful of doing. And we know as the story progresses, we see how God empowers Gideon. And it ends up being not about Gideon's strength, but God's strength. Almost the point of why God called him, to use him in his weakness. When you look in the book of Jeremiah, a young chap, is called by God to be a prophet to the nations. Imagine this. It's a completely different skill set. So, Moses was like a leader, if you like, in one regard, not the prophet leader. You've got an army leader, and then you've got a prophetic leader. Completely different roles within in Israel. And it says this, that he was called to be a prophet to the nations. However, when Jeremiah responds, again with bashfulness, and it expresses his own limitations. In Jeremiah 1, 6-8, it says this, alas, sovereign Lord. You've got to love the alas. I said... This is Jeremiah saying what he said, and I'm saying what Jeremiah said that he said. He said, I do not know how to speak. You can imagine God just stopping there going, but you're speaking now. I do not know how to speak. Check this. I am too young. I'm too young to speak. Why? You know, a prophet is someone who would have been a little bit older, that people would have listened to. Just like in Argentina, no one listens to young people. They don't know anything. You do really. You just don't. But that's how we feel, and yet this young boy, you can imagine the insecurity. He says, I'm too young. But the Lord said to me, do not say I'm too young. You must go to everyone I send you and say whatever I command you. And it says this, I love it. I love the way it caveats it. It says, do not be afraid of them. It's going to be natural for you to be afraid of them, but you don't need to be afraid of them. Why? For I am with you, and I will rescue you, declares the Lord. So he said, I'm going to call you out in the bashful area. You don't think you're good enough to speak, to prophesy. He said, but you haven't got to worry because I've got your back. And so he initially feels inadequate due to his perceived youth and lack of eloquence and not being able to speak, probably because he hasn't got enough knowledge even if he's young. But God reassures him and emphasizes that it's not really, again, about your abilities, Jeremiah. It's about me using you. And I love that fact that so often, nearly in every scripture, it's like God picks someone who's not particularly good at something to do his work, to show that it's God doing it, not the person in their own strength. And so what makes you think you're any different? That God's not going to find the weakest thing in you, the most bashful thing in you, the thing that you do not want to do, and say, you got to do it. I'm calling you to do it. Tony, you're speaking next week on stage. No, I won't do that for you. What makes you think you're any different, that I'm any different than what God's done all throughout history and gone, where's your bashful dwarf? And he knows, he created you. And I'm going to call him to step forward. So again, I ask you, what are you not doing that God is calling you to do? And the reason you're not doing it is because you're timid or bashful or fearful. It's that dwarf inside you that you just can't get past. For many people, it's different things, but I'm asking you, what are you not doing? We've got a great opportunity with the new youth conference stuff and the kids takeover stuff. We're actually going to start including very young people into our band. I can't wait. It's great. We haven't done it for a little while. And our band are amazing. They're great. And I want to, and Jack does, want to include people who maybe aren't good enough. Who would feel like, I'm not good enough. So what? I remember when I made Matt play the guitar for the first time. He knew like 3.5 chords. Honestly. He was like Phoebe, like old lady. Like, he just didn't know what he was doing. I was like, come and play. It'll be fun. And I can imagine, because he doesn't like change, he was like, what? I was like, it'll be fine. And I think God's calling us to do that in an area of our life. We've got an awesome opportunity for our young people to come and join the crew in youth conference delivery or in kids takeover, to come and sing and play. But many of them will not feel adequate. And we as parents, what do? Go on. Go on. You're going to fail. You might even sound a bit rubbish, but I'm still going to clap and cheer you on. And it's no different with God in our life. It's like, I know you're going to be rubbish at this. I'm going to have to catch all the balls you drop, but I'm asking you to do it anyway. For you, what are you not doing? Maybe for you, it's joining a connect group or actually connecting with people in the church or outside of the church, Christian folk who hold you accountable to things. Maybe you're terrified of doing that, for opening up because you've been hurt in the past. Maybe for you, it's not opening up in a relationship. God's calling you to open up in a relationship so it can be real. But you don't want to be taken for a fool. You don't want to be taken for a ride. That bashful dwarf in you comes out and protects you. Maybe you're not giving up that job that God's like, you need to just walk away. Or maybe you need to swap job. Or maybe just get a job. What's God calling you to do that you can't do because that bashful dwarf is terrifying you? Maybe for you it's having that conversation that you know you must address. Or talking to your neighbour about church. Or for English people in here, about anything. Like saying morning. What's God calling you to do that you're terrified of because the bashful dwarf won't let you do it? For some of us, it might be sharing our faith or inviting to church or giving financially to church. It could be anything. What is God calling you to do that you just find difficult? Because you're scared. Because you're bashful. Because I want to remind you what Paul reminded Timothy in 2 Timothy 1:6. It says this. This is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you when I laid my hands on you. So what he's saying to the young Timothy, it says this. He was saying, I want to remind you of this. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity. I want you to take that in. God has not given us a spirit of fear or of timidity, of being timid, of being bashful. That spirit in us, that dwarf that lives in us, didn't come from God. But what God gave us was a spirit that has power and love and self-discipline. They're the things that God gave us. He did not give us the bashful dwarf. He didn't give us a spirit of fear, of timidity. And so like Paul was saying this and saying to Timothy, and yet he was saying this is the optimum situation, that you're not fearful, that you're not scared. And yet the same dude also wrote to the Corinthian church saying this, 2 Corinthians, Paul wrote this to them in 7 verse 5 and 6. When we arrived in Macedonia, there was no rest for us. We faced conflict from every direction with battles on the outside, and check this, and fear on the inside. So Paul was acknowledging at them times when all this stuff was going on around him, there was fear on the inside of him. He just, hold on, he wrote to Timothy saying, God hasn't given you a spirit of fear. But he was saying at the same time, when I was in these difficult situations, I experienced fear. So Paul's saying, this is normal behavior. These dwarfs live inside of us. It's just that God didn't put them there. We haven't been given that spirit of fear from God. It says this, but God, who encourages those who are discouraged, encouraged us by the arrival of Titus, this other dude who comes along, who alleviates that temporal feeling of fear inside. You see, Paul was acknowledging this thing in us, this fear, this timidity, that it's a real thing, but what he's showing here is that it's from the flesh. And that it's not from... We'll all have it. It's built in our program, introvert, extrovert. It comes out in different ways, but this fear, this timidity, this bashfulness, this dwarf will come out in different ways, but it's from the flesh. It comes from inside of us, not from God. And so we have the power to overcome it. We have the power to put the dwarf in its place. Because the power that's in me is greater than the power that's in the world. That power, the Holy Spirit living inside of us, even has the power over our own flesh. I think it's okay to be bashful. I do, even as a personality trait, it's fine. Even if it comes out in lots of ways. I think it's okay to be scared. I think it's okay to feel timid in an area of life that you don't feel comfortable being pushed in. But I want to say, whatever it is that God's calling you to do, then just do it scared. Feel it, but do it scared. Push through it, do it afraid. And I love Bashful the dwarf. You know, he's all... But the climax of the movie, what's he doing? He's chasing down the evil queen with a sword. Ah! Do you think he was like... Grumpy was doing it out of like... Argh! He was going, I'm terrified. Bashful the dwarf was still engaging in the battle, but he just done it scared. Paul would say that the flesh and the spirit are in battle all the time. And the spirit is bold and confident and based on God and based in truth. And our flesh, if you like, is based on self-consciousness and being timid and fearful, that bashful dwarf. And these battle against each other inside of us all the time. But it's faith in him and the Holy Spirit that allows us to overcome it. And I'll be really honest with you, you know, like doing what I do, leading the church and the food bank and everything has its challenges. It can be really difficult, but one of the greatest honours for me is in doing what I do is seeing people who are transformed from timid, bashful people to like these powerhouses, whether they're extrovert or introvert, but they go from timid and bashful and they're grown out of that and the dwarf steps forward and God uses that and they're these powerhouse of a person. It's one of the greatest things of my job, seeing that transformation in people, either in a short space of time or over decades. It's one of the greatest things about my job. And then I suppose the long and the short of it, of what I'm getting to today, is that God has not given you a spirit of timidity. God hasn't given you that. God hasn't given you that spirit of timidity. And sometimes we need to push through our bashfulness in whatever area that presents itself to actually walk out the path that God's laid before us. We actually have to push back against that bashfulness to walk out what God's asked, just like Moses. He had to say, even though I feel inadequate and I'm bashful, I'm going to choose and I'm going to do. Just like with Gideon, even though I feel incompetent and not strong to lead an army, even as Jeremiah, who didn't feel he had the words and was too young to be a prophet, they had to push through that bashfulness and be reliant on God. So, to finish, in what area do you need to tell the bashful little dwarf to wind his neck in? Will you take control of it instead of him? Imagine that. Imagine in that area of your life that a little bashful dwarf is controlling you. If that was in real life, like if you're a big tough guy and a tiny little fellow who's all shy made you do things, you'd hand him off in the face and tell him to do one. And so I want to ask you, which area of your life do you need to hand off a dwarf in the face? I got that so Ricky Gervais. Which area of life do you need to push back, to tell to the bashful dwarf that presents itself to wind his neck in? What is God calling you to do that you're not doing because you're scared? What is it? Because I want to encourage you, just do it. And if needed, do it scared. Amen? Let's pray. Father, I just thank you